Hi, welcome to Two for Tea by Bonacori Brands. In this video, we'll review the patent, engine firing cycles, and theory of how the tea kettle functions with its steam engine. Beni Issler will review the original patent and how the tea kettle functions in the following slides. Enjoy. Our recording.
All right, awesome. So first, briefly, just an outline of the kettle itself. A regular tea kettle will play a single whistle tone that's caused by the release of steam. In the musical tea kettle, we have 4 different whistles, and each are tuned to a different note. And the way that we play a melody is through a spinning disc that has that melody encoded in the position of different holes that are drilled through the disc. Depending on how the holes are aligned with the upper housing, the steam will be released through one of the 4 whistles, which is what plays the melody. The big difficulty here is how do we spin the disc in a well-timed manner? And this is achieved through ratchet teeth that are in the lower end of the disc. And the ratchet teeth in the disc are pretty wide, and they will engage with the teeth in the piston and the cylinder, which are the parts pictured here, 77 and 72. And these will engage with the disc in an alternating manner. So first the piston will go up and spin the disc by half a tooth. And then the piston will go down and the cylinder will go up and spin the disc by another half tooth. And then the cycle repeats. And so what this presentation is an outline of how the engine works to create this alternating motion that spins the disc and plays the melody. So we can move on. This is a diagram of an assembly of the kettle in fusion. At the very start, when the kettle is not heated up, this is the default position of the engine. So there's a compression spring inside the piston and cylinder, and it's pushing up on the piston and down on the cylinder. This means that the piston will be fully engaged with the disc and the cylinder will be completely disengaged. This is the resting position because there are no other forces at play except for gravity and the force of the spring. Another thing to note here is that I'll be labeling pressures in different chambers. Here we have the inner pressure of the kettle, which is labeled PK, and the ambient pressure, which is always our lowest pressure, PA. So there will be more chambers described in the next slides. So once we start heating the kettle, the first thing that happens when there's a pressure buildup is that steam will go through the teeth, which are not a perfect seal, and then down through the piston ports, which are 2 very small openings on the top surface of the piston. And that means that the inside of the piston will begin to pressurize with the kettle. So right now, these chambers are both completely open to each other because of the piston port. And so there's an unobstructed path for steam to flow from the kettle as it's being created by the heat into the cylinder chamber. So the first stage of motion is that it's caused by leakage through the bottom groove on the cylinder. So as we discussed, the cylinder chamber is now being pressurized slowly. And so that pressure can also slowly leak through the seal at the very bottom, through this intentional groove in the floor. And so that's going to begin to pressurize the lower part of the gasket and create a pressure difference through the stem valve. So the pressure gradient between the cylinder chamber and the inside of the shuttle valve, which is pictured on the right here, is going to create a pressure gradient going upwards. And this pressure gradient is going to pop the shuttle valve up because air is not able to escape through the O-ring that's in the inner stem. So yeah, that's the first motion, is the shuttle valve going up. We can keep going. When the shuttle valve does go up, it's going to block the piston ports. So the kettle pressure is going to continue to increase, but the cylinder pressure is not. So there's going to be a horizontal pressure gradient between the kettle pressure and the cylinder pressure, because now they're no longer equalized because the piston port is closed. The result of this is going to be an upwards force from the pressure of the kettle itself that's going to act against the compression spring. So our piston is still pushed up, but now the cylinder is going to begin to move up as well and partially engage with the teeth of the disc. Still, there's no rotation, but now both the disc and the piston are engaged with the disc. And so the second motion is the cylinder moving up until it can move up no further because of the disc itself. We can keep going. So now our piston ports are still shut and the kettle pressure is still increasing, but now the pressure can no longer act to push the cylinder up, which has a very large surface area below it. But it is still leaking through the teeth. And so now it will continue to act against the compression spring, but the motion is going to change and the piston is now going to move down. This is a bit counterintuitive because the pressure gradient is acting on the top surface of the piston instead of the lower surface of the cylinder like it was before. But actually there is still a force pushing the cylinder upwards. That is the primary force, and it's stronger than whatever force is pushing the piston down. But there's no more motion because the cylinder is simply restricted by the disc. So there's still an upwards pressure on that cylinder, but now there's also an increasing force moving down on the piston. And this is going to continue to compress that spring until the piston completely disengages with the teeth. So we can keep going. And as soon as that piston disengages with the teeth, the upward force on the cylinder is going to push it completely upwards because now the disc is allowed to rotate. It's not being held in place by the piston. And so it's going to push up to completely engage with the disc and in the process, spin the disc by half a tooth. So that's our first half step of the cycle. We're at the very middle of the cycle. The piston is disengaged because of the kettle pressure and the spring is fully compressed. Keep in mind the piston ports are still shut. We can keep going. So now, this is another delicate part of the mechanism because we're relying on controlled leakage through the piston ports. So the piston is at its very lowest state and the cylinder is at its very highest state engaged with the disc. But the kettle pressure is still increasing. And the result of that is that the steam has nowhere to go. I mean, it's being released through the whistles, but it's still being generated. Steam is being generated faster than it can be released. So the pressure is going to keep increasing. And that's going to force some of that vapor to leak through the sealed piston ports. Even though they're shut, it's going to leak through until the cylinder pressure is roughly equal to the kettle pressure. So very slowly, I mean, this all happens fast, but it's not immediate, right? There's a time that it's taken for the kettle pressure to equalize with the cylinder pressure. And that time is actually one of the most important factors in the timing of the whole engine. If we're generating more steam, if there's a higher rate of heat flowing into the kettle, which is generating steam also at a higher rate, then this step is going to take less time because the vapor is going to leak into the cylinder chamber faster. And that means that the whole engine is going to run faster. So this leakage is very important. We can go ahead. So eventually the cylinder pressure is going to completely equalize with the kettle pressure. Well, it's not going to completely equalize, but as it equalizes, the force acting on the piston and the cylinder is going to decrease. And eventually it's going to decrease enough that the spring is going to take over again and be the dominant force. So when the force of the spring is greater than this pressure force acting on the piston, then the spring will push the piston upwards until its teeth are half engaged with the valve plate. So again, it's going to push up until it can move up no further because the disc is being held in place still by the cylinder. Okay, step 10. So now the piston can move up. No further, but the pressure inside the cylinder is still equalizing with the kettle. And eventually that spring force is going to be dominant once again, and it's going to be enough to push the cylinder downwards. And so the spring will push the cylinder downwards until it disengages with the teeth in the plate. Step 11 now. So just like at the very middle step, once the teeth in the cylinder completely disengage with the disc, that means that the force of the spring can now push the piston upwards back to its initial state. And as the piston moves up, it's going to spin the disc by another half step. So that completes the engine cycle. We're back to the initial position, but now the kettle is pressurized, and the disc has moved by one full tooth. So that's what describes the whole engine cycle. I think there's one more step there. So now, just like step 3, the way that this whole mechanism resets is through leakage on the groove in the cylinder. And so as the... Oh, one more comment. Can you go back on one slide? Something I forgot to mention is there's nothing holding up the shuttle valve anymore. So once that piston is pushed down, the shuttle valve will fall with it. And now the kettle pressure and the cylinder pressure are completely equalized because the piston ports are open. So now we can move on. Considering that the shuttle valve is lowered down, the same thing will happen as in step 1, which is leakage under that rubber seal diaphragm will create a pressure gradient, and that's going to push the shuttle valve upwards again. But this time, when it moves up, the already pressurized kettle is going to allow all that built-up pressure inside the cylinder to escape out into the atmosphere, because that O-ring in the bottle of the inner stem is no longer sealing the the cylinder chamber from the atmosphere. So this time, instead of going up and staying up, it's going to go up and then pop down again, because there's no more pressure inside the cylinder chamber to hold it up there. All of the air is just going to escape into the atmosphere. And so all of the vapor that initially starts in the kettle flows and leaks through the piston ports, pressurizes the piston chamber. All of that is now vented through the inner stem. And so now we're back at a stage where the kettle is at a high pressure and the piston chamber is at a low pressure.
Thank you, Benny. And
I think there might be one more. Let's just see. But yeah, so this is what I was describing. So after this steam exhaust, which is from the shuttle chamber popping up, all that steam is going to exhaust, and now we have a kettle pressure that's higher than the cylinder pressure, because the cylinder pressure is now equalized with the shuttle valve chamber, and that's equalized with ambient pressure. So now we're back to a stage where pressure can start to build up again, and the whole cycle is going to start from step 2. Okay, that's it. I think we're done.
That's very, very good. Very good.